The Illustrious History of the People's Church, Part 1, read by Kristen Lems
and Nathaniel Trejo.
Well, if you want to talk about the People's Church, you have to talk about Uptown, Chicago's growing fame as a home for immigrants, and three ministers, Hiram Washington Thomas, Preston Bradley, and Donald L. Benedict. Let's start with a look at Hiram Washington Thomas. October 21st, 1880, documents establishing the People's Church of Chicago were set up, and Hiram Washington Thomas was called as its first minister.
Here's the language they used to establish the People's Church.
It is the aim of the People's Church to provide a place of worship for all, for strangers and those without a religious home,
and those of much or little faith, and of different beliefs, and to unite all in the great law and duty of love to God and man, and in earnest efforts to do good in the world. In form, the People's Church is independent, congregational, and requires no theological tests as conditions of membership.
We think and let think. We hold that upon the great questions of the Christian faith and life, the freedom of reason should not be bound by the opinions of men, but that all should search the Scriptures and believe and do what they think is true and right. And the People's Church welcomes to its fellowship all who are in sympathy with its spirit and work. November 1880. The first service was held in the popular Hooley's Theater in downtown Chicago on November 7th, 1880.
By 1885, overflow crowds required them to leave the theater for the huge Chicago Opera House, with standing room only for Dr. Thomas's sermons. I made the rounds, speaking around the country on social and ethical issues. I lost my dear wife and 6 of my 7 children, and was in constant pain from medical conditions, but I soldiered on.
His body was frail, his walk unsteady, with a Lincoln-like lankiness. He was an invalid who for 50 years performed the labors of a Hercules. His second wife, Vandalia Varnum, a flaming advocate of women's rights, said of Thomas's last words, "Women are coming into their own. I'll not be here, but you will, and you will be part of it when all women will have the ballot."
I can see it. I can see it. A world of Congress, a world of justice, a world peace. He established the Chicago Peace Society and was president of the Congress of Religions, organized in Chicago after the World's Fair and Parliament of World Religion in 1893. But by 1912, 5 years after his demise, his congregation had declined. They were waiting for someone who could carry along the liberal religious tradition.
Enter Preston Bradley.
In 1911, Preston Bradley arrived in Chicago with 28 cents, secured housing in the home of Mrs. Annie Bates, and studied at the Moody Bible Institute. Although Moody was instrumental in furthering his education, he was suspended for committing several sins, like smoking a pipe and attending the theater. Preston Bradley was student pastor at a small Presbyterian congregation, the Church of Providence, in 1912. But he was asked by the presbytery to reconsider his theological position or leave the Presbyterian ministry. I refused to accept the idea that an unbaptized infant would be damned to hell. What a foolish notion. Drew from the presbytery and served as minister to 86 persons who followed me out of the church.
They met in a small hall in Viking Temple on Sheffield on July 7th, 1912. He described the situation as follows.
We were a small group of people who had a deep faith and the future of our liberal and free church. Not one person present had any tradition of liberality in religious thought or organization. We had all stepped boldly out of ecclesiastical bondage and theological servitude.
The faithful remnants of the People's Church approached Bradley and made him an offer. They proposed that the two congregations combine. Bradley accepted, and the People's Church looked forward to a long period with a new minister and a new, larger congregation. Stay tuned for the illustrious history of People's Church, Part 2.